It's time to review the only George A. Romero film that debuted at the #1 spot in the box office, Creepshow.
That's why God made fathers, babe. That's why God made fathers.
Hey there, hi there, ho there, Andrew here, and I would like to thank Tom Dagenhart for giving me this film to go ahead and review. And if you'd like to hear your name or see your name in a future video, all you got to do is give me a movie. It's that simple. But right now, we're going to get into a very historical horror movie. And why is it historical? Well, there's a lot of firsts in this movie, such as this was the very first George A. Romero film where he did not write the screenplay. Who wrote the screenplay? Stephen King. Which, mind you, this was Stephen King's first screenplay that he ever wrote. And this movie is also the acting debut of Stephen King. And it was the first time that Romero and King teamed up for a film with each other and special effects makeup master Tom Savini. And this movie was also the very first time Savini had ever made a fully animatronic creation for a film. Needless to say, this movie was very big for its time and to this time right now. And I am just dropping the knowledge on you. We open with a shot of a typical middle American home. Jack-o'-lantern in the window, and Father Stan, played by Tom Atkins, who oddly isn't credited in this movie, and I wonder why. Is it because he was the lead in Halloween 3, which opened 3 weeks earlier than this movie? Or is it because he doesn't have his mustache in this movie? I mean, is Tom Atkins really Tom Atkins if he doesn't have his mustache on? To be fair, watching him without it is like watching Tom Selleck without his. It's oddly familiar, but something doesn't seem right. Where was I? Oh yeah. Dad, Stan, doesn't like the magazines that his son Billy, played by Joe King, is reading at such a young age. Whoa, wait a minute. That kid's name is Joe King? That kid's gonna be scarred for life. Who would name their kid Joe King? Oh, Stephen King. That makes sense. Well, the kid's gonna be scarred for life anyways. So Stan tells his son that the magazines are crap, and Billy refers to the magazines that Dad has in his underwear drawer. And that's what happens when you talk back to Dad.
That's why God made fathers, babe. That's why God made fathers.
Is that the reason? I mean, if that's the reason, then I gotta get on this whole procreation thing quick. Billy then mentions that he hopes his dad rots in hell. Ah, what a swell kid. And then this happens. He sees the creep from Creepshow in the window and he smiles. What's wrong with this kid? I would have been out of that room before the crap left my body and hit the floor. So the animated intro gets us into the first story of the comic book that Stan threw out into the trash, and it is called Father's Day. We open with the Grantham family, a family that has prospered off of bootlegging, murder, and many other nasty things. You know, like the Kennedys. The family members are Sylvia Grantham, played by Carrie Nye, her nephew Richard Grantham, niece Cass Blaine, and her husband Hank Blaine, played by Warner Shook, Elizabeth Regan, and Ed Harris, respectively. Then there's also Sylvia's aunt, Aunt Bedelia, played by Vivica Linfords. The exposition of this story is told to Hank because, hey, he's the latest addition to the family, and we find that Bedelia's father, Nathan Grantham, played by John Lorner, was a very mean man that knew his family only wanted his wealth that he acquired through nefarious ways. He had a stroke and Bedelia became his caretaker. She also had a lover that her father had killed and made look like a hunting accident. This was the last straw, and on Father's Day, 7 years earlier to the current story we're watching, Bedelia bashed in Nathan's skull with a particular ashtray, killing him before giving him his Father's Day cake that he had been screaming for. Really, is that a thing? Father's Day, do you get cake?
That's why God made fathers, babe. That's why God made fathers.
Even a better reason to procreate. Anyway, that's what everyone thinks happened. No one knows for certain. The Granthams sure do know how to cover their tracks, apparently. We flash forward to Aunt Bedelia at the family graveyard on property, paying her respects in her normal, drunken manner, like she does every year. Side note, do you want to know the difference between a cemetery and a graveyard? Well, a graveyard is normally in a churchyard or sometimes on an old family estate, and a cemetery is a cemetery. While Aunt Bedelia confirms the exposition in some dialogue to the gravestone, she drops her Jim Beam whiskey bottle, and this is the part of the movie that really confused me. After watching it a couple of times, it made sense, and let me break it down for you by using some lexicon. The word whiskey in its Gaelic form is called Uis Vega, which means water of life, and this eventually was shortened into its slang form, which an Irishman would say whiskey, which sounds like whiskey. And look how smart you're becoming just watching a Creepshow review. Okay, enough of that. So basically, this whiskey is the trigger that wakes up good old Nathan, who decides to collect on that Father's Day cake that he was promised so long ago. Again, has cake always been a Father's Day thing? I mean, we never gave my father any cake on Father's Day, and he's passed, and I don't really want to give him a reason to come back and scare the bejeebus out of me over cake. And now for a musical break. Whew, look at Ed Harris dance there. He is definitely giving Crispin Glover a run for the most awkward dance in a horror movie. I can't decide who wins that battle. So to cool himself off a bit, Henry goes outside to find out what is taking Aunt Bedelia so long and comes across the family graveyard. Yeah, I wouldn't be hanging out there. He then finds Nathan's grave site and the whiskey bottle where he begins to partake in some drinking. Whoops! So the tombstone slides a bit, and I would be thinking right now is a perfect time to get up. Slides again. Get up, Hank! Oh, look, a dead body and a zombie. I got a great idea.
Now, why don't you make like a tree and get out of here?
It's leave, you idiot. Make like a tree and leave.
So this is a Romero flick, and now zombies have Jedi powers? Like, they can go ahead and pull tombstones off of sheer will? Okay, technically, Nathan isn't really a zombie. He's more of a revenant, and there is a difference here. See, a zombie is a mindless undead character, and a revenant actually returns back from the dead to the living for a particular reason. Kinda like cake. Hello, dead horse. I think you've been beaten long enough. So after Hank's death, Nathan meets up with Sylvia, and holy crow! Okay, that caught me off guard. Richard and Cass go looking for everyone, and they come across good old Nathan with his cake that he made by himself. Easy as pie. No, wait a minute. That doesn't make any sense. So the question really is, do Richard and Cass bite the big one? Who knows? We'll leave that one to you to decide. The next story we see is the lonesome death of Jordy Verrill. Gee, I wonder how this is going to end. This story is very basic and comes from the short story Weeds by Stephen King, starring Stephen King as the title character. Jordy is a local hick that witnesses a meteor crash on his farm. He investigates it, burns his hand, and at this time I have to say, if you haven't caught it by now, anytime something bad happens in this movie, a flood of light of comic book color saturates the whole scene. Jordy realizes that his newfound meteor could be sold and he could pay back his $200 bank loan. $200? Who has a loan for $200? In today's money, that's like a little over $500. Way to aim high, Jordy. This leads us to Jordy, who has a dream sequence where he sees a man at the Department of Meteors. Is that a thing? And the man he sees is played by Bingo O'Malley. Bingo O'Malley? Who names the kid Bingo O'Malley? That's something you name the dog. The dog?
Got a lot of fond memories of that dog.
So anyway, Bingo pulls out some cash to give him for the remains of the meteor, and hold on! Back that up! That's the ashtray from the Father's Day segment next to the cash box with a meteor on it. Jordy is having a daydream of a murder weapon from a previous story? That's just weird. So getting back to the story, Jordy sits down and watches some pro wrestling, which was actually the WWF at the time before it became the WWE. Side note, Vince McMahon was the one that was announcing that match, and Bob Backlund was one of the wrestlers, and if you don't know who Bob Backlund is, he is the longest running heavyweight champion in WWE history. Alright, somebody get me a chainsaw. I'm cutting that from the script. After watching some TV, Jordy realizes that he is growing this moss grass-like substance on his body, which was a result from him touching the meteor, and has another dream sequence where a doctor, played again by Bingo O'Malley, in different facial hair, wants to amputate. What? What goes on in Jordy's mind that amputation is the first thing he thinks of? So grass is growing like crazy all over the Verrill farm, and Jordy too. It becomes itchy and too unbearable for Jordy, so he decides to take a bath. Then he has a vision. This one isn't so much a daydream, but a vision in his bathroom mirror of his dead father, played by Bingo. Dead dad says don't do it because it will cause certain death. And apparently he didn't read the title of the story. So Jordy gets in and becomes the Green Man, basically, and he decides to become an inspiration for Kurt Cobain and, well, you know. The funny thing at the end of this story is that it shows a road sign saying 37 miles to Portland, Maine, which happens to be King's hometown, and 5 miles to Castle Rock, the name of King's company, and fictional town of many of his stories. And with the end of that story, we go to the next, which is called Something to Tide You Over. This is the story of Harry Wentworth, played by a young Ted Danson, and Richard Vickers, played by a young Did Leslie Nielsen ever age? So in this story, we find out that Harry has been having an affair with Richard's wife, Becky. And the problem for Harry is that Richard is a psychopath. But not a screaming lunatic psychopath. I'm talking about the cold, calculating one. And Leslie Nielsen does a tremendous job in this short. I mean, he definitely gives the sense that this man is nuts. So Richard plays into Harry's emotional attachment to Becky, and he gets him to play Richard's game. In order for Harry to see Becky once again, he must be buried up to his neck in sand. And if Harry can hold his breath long enough and wiggle when the waves come in, he should be able to free himself. After Harry is buried, Richard then shows that Becky was put into the same situation. Richard drives away and watches the demise of his two lovebirds via video at the home and sees Harry swearing revenge. Richard comes back to get his equipment, and when it's done, he sees that the cable's been ripped, and he figures that the tide must have pulled him out. We then see Richard in his best tracksuit, lying in bed, watching TV when... Hold it! On the nightstand! There's the ashtray again! Getting back to the story, Richard takes a shower and thinks he hears something, but soon finds himself with his waterlogged lovers. That was hard to say. And they decide to put him in the same position. But to be honest, if anybody can beat the tide, my bet is on Richard.
I can hold my breath for a long time!
The following story is called The Crate, which starts off with a janitor flipping a coin that rolls under some stairs. He goes under to see that there is a crate there. We then get a cutaway scene where we see some important characters in this story. Dexter Stanley, played by Fritz Weaver, also Wilma, aka Billy Northrup, and Henry Northrup, played by Adrienne Barbeau and Hal Holbrook, respectively. And in a small amount of time, we find out that Billy is just a terrible person, not because she's loud, but because she's a drunk, a gossiper, belittler, and just an all-around bad person. Also, we find out that Dexter is a womanizer and Henry is a weak-willed man. Dexter gets a call from Mike the janitor about the crate, stating that it says Arctic Expedition and that it's dated 1834. Then Henry kills Billy and gets applause? Oh, that's just a daydream. Back to the university, Dexter and Mike take a look at the crate. Then we see Henry at home and he kills Billy. Oh wait, that's just wishful thinking on Henry's part again. Going back to the university, Mike sees some eyes and decides to put his hand inside the crate. Why? Why would you even do that? That's the type of thing that's going to get you. And Mike gets eaten. Dexter freaks out and runs to tell somebody, enter a college student only here to add to the body count. So yeah, that kid dies in true Tom Savini style. Dexter makes his way to Henry's place to get help. He explains everything to Henry, and Henry decides to go ahead and drug Dexter. This creature is a perfect way to get rid of something that has been annoying Henry for a long time. So Henry writes a note to his wife Wilma. Hold it, there's the ashtray again. Is there something about this ashtray that binds everything together?
Surrounds us and penetrates us. It binds the galaxy together.
Where was I? Oh yeah. Henry writes the note to get Wilma to show up at the university. She does, and it ends just the way that Henry wanted it to. Henry takes the remains of all the people that died and the creature to a rock quarry and drops it in the drink. After that, Henry and Dexter realize that the only thing that they truly can count on is each other's friendship, and they get back to playing some chess. Oh yeah, and that creature, it broke out. And now to the final story. This one's called They're Creeping Up on You. This is the story of Upson Pratt, played by E.G. Marshall. He, I guess you could say, is germophobic and maybe obsessive-compulsive. This story is straightforward, really, and we see him kill a cockroach, and then, come on! The ashtray is now a soap dish? Okay, I have watched this movie many times, and this story itself still gives me the heebie-jeebies. Every time I watch it, I think to myself, this story can go two different ways, and I don't know which one is right. First off, Upson is an insanely rich man and has bought out many different companies and sees his competition like bugs. Small, mindless, and always creeping up on you. The only way to beat your competition is to squish them and exterminate them. We see that he's cold-hearted and even taunts the wife of a man that committed suicide whose business he just acquired.
Yes! George Genron told me old Norman went out with a bang.
All he talks about is the employees he has and how they are like bugs. And he keeps on saying that he has a bug problem. The story ends with him eventually not getting his employees to do exactly what he wants them to do, and the bugs taking over his place, which leads him to have a heart attack. Now, the flip side to this story is that instead of being insanely rich, I think he's just insane and he's a patient at a mental ward. And that would explain the set design. It would also explain how he smashes a cockroach or kills one and then you don't see the remnants remnants. Also, when some people are on hard psychotropics, they tend to hallucinate and think that they see bugs all over them. So I've been told. I feel that this is the real story just because of the character White and how he reacts. He sounds more like an orderly, patronizing a patient rather than being a maintenance guy talking to the owner of a building.
What way, Mr. Pratt?
Like I was crazy.
Oh, no, sir, Mr. Pratt, sir. I don't think you is crazy, not at all.
Side note, George A. Romero said that the cockroaches were the most expensive part of this movie. He said that the cockroaches cost 50 cents a piece, and he used 250,000 cockroaches for this movie. That means that he invested $125,000 in roaches alone. Now let's get to the wraparound story to end all of the stories. We see two garbage men, one of them played by Tom Savini. He's the one with the mustache. What is it with guys named Tom and mustaches? The two men look through the comic book and see that a voodoo order form is missing. We then cut to Stan the father and Billy's mother, and we see that Stan is having some pains in his neck. Why? Because Billy is taking out his aggression via voodoo on Dad. OMG, what is the kid got an ashtray on his desk for? What is the underlining story about this ashtray? Smoking kills? I don't know. Anyways, that was Ashtray the movie. Creepshow the movie. And I have to say, a movie based off of old 1950 comic books, like Tales from the Crypt, Vault of Horror, this is a good flick. It has an ensemble cast. Most do a really good performance, but tops goes to Leslie Nielsen for playing Richard Vickers. That man just played the right amount of deadly and crazy. And Nielsen, earlier in his career, played a fair amount of dramas, but it was a real shame that we never got a chance to see him in more bad guy roles. Also, Stephen King did a really good job as Geordi, especially for being his very first acting role, and being in a story where you're practically the only person can be really tough to pull off, especially for an inexperienced actor. And when it comes to experienced actors, E.G. Marshall does a bang-up job handling this story practically on his own. George A. Romero does a great job of converting a visual film into a comic book. The floodlighting on the horror moments and the comic book templates behind the actors remind you that the horror is over the top and campy and really shouldn't be taken too seriously. I never understood why people review this movie with disdain, saying that it's not scary enough and it's not true horror. Romero and King made this movie as an homage to the horror comics that were published and how those comics inspired so many others. It would be like critiquing Tarantino and Rodriguez for making a poorly produced film called Grindhouse when it was supposed to be looking like an exploitation film from the 1970s. They did it on purpose, people. So would I recommend this movie? Yes. And if you're a horror fan like me, buy it. There are a very few number of movies out there that have this level of talent, craftsmanship, and love of the topic, both in front and behind the camera. You could play this movie in the background at any Halloween party and you will slowly find people sitting in front of the TV laughing and maybe even being creeped out at this show. Not this show, that show. Creepshow. So if you liked the video, make sure you tap the like button, and if you're a fan of what I do or this movie, consider sharing it with all your friends in all forms of social media. Don't forget to subscribe so you get notified the moment I upload, and I will see you in the next video.